Imagine walking through a forest. The first thing you notice are usually the tallest trees. You look up at their height, their strength, their ability to reach towards the sky. But if you look down, there is something much, much smaller. Moss. Moss does not compete for sunlight. It does not grow tall either. It retains moisture and it prevents erosion. Perhaps most importantly, it creates the condition for the plants to grow. For a long time, I thought moss was simply a plant, until one day I realized that there were people that living like a moss, and I was one of them. For most of my life, people have described me as a reliable one, the calm one, the mature one. Being dependable felt valuable. Being needed felt meaningful. But looking back, those qualities that people admired in me were shaped long before I realized what it was costing me. Part of that story begins between two countries. I spent a great part of my childhood living in the UK before returning to Japan. I first had to learn what it meant to adapt before learning what it really means to become a moss. I still remember the first months back in Japan. In the UK, teachers constantly ask questions during class. Students are encouraged to participate. If we had an idea, we shared it. Making mistakes wasn't necessarily a problem. Trying and curiosity mattered. Failure wasn't something to fear. So when I returned to Japan, I carried that mindset with me. And one day, a teacher asked us a question during class. Without hesitation, I raised my hand. I wasn't completely sure of the answer, but that had never stopped me before. So I answered. And guess what? I was wrong. The next thing that happened wasn't dramatic. Nobody shouted at me. Nobody told me to stop speaking. But I remember hearing a few laughs. I remember seeing classmates glance at each other. And I remember feeling as though I had broken a rule that nobody has explained to me before. The lesson wasn't written anywhere, but I understood it immediately. In Japan, if you raise your hand, you should already know the answer. For the first time, I realized that being wrong carried a different meaning. And after that day, I started hesitating. Before speaking, I would double-check my answer. And eventually, I found my hands raised less often. But not because I was afraid of being wrong, but afraid that I don't want to make other people uncomfortable. And looking back, I don't think it changed the way I answered questions during class. I think it changed the way I moved through the world. Because once you learn that fitting in matters more than standing out, you start paying attention to different things. And at first, that felt like a strength. Because the more I paid attention to the people around me, the better I became at understanding them. I learned to notice what wasn't being said. And over time, those habits became part of who I was. And that pattern followed far beyond the classroom. As I grew older, I became known as the listener, the friend people trusted, the person people came to when they were struggling. And to this day, friends often tell me about their worries, their relationships, their uncertainties, their fears. And every now and then, somebody tells me something that really sticks into my mind. They say, "You're lucky you're so strong. You don't have the same concerns as the rest of us." When I heard those phrases, I smiled. But inside, something felt wrong. Because the truth was the exact opposite. I had fears, I had concerns, I had nights where I was completely overwhelmed. I just never told anyone. Growing up, my family faced constant financial instabilities. There were times when bills couldn't be paid, times when university accommodation fee became a source of stress, times when money created tension through our household. My parents argued frequently, and my mother looked exhausted in a way that sleep even couldn't fix. And as the oldest child, I felt responsible. Nobody sat down and told me it was my job. But think about it. When a family becomes unstable, someone naturally tries to hold everything together. So I became that person. When my mother was exhausted, I tried to listen to her and carry that emotional weight she had. When my two brothers were worried, I tried to reassure them. When conflict appeared, I tried to stay calm. And without realizing it, I gradually did what Moss does best, holding everything together beneath the surface. But I never became good at sharing my own. And part of that reason was simple. My mother was already struggling. My brothers were too. The last thing I wanted was to add more weight to their shoulder. But there was actually another reason too, a reason I rarely admitted. I was afraid that if I stopped being the strong one, people would stop depending on me. Afraid that if I became the one who struggled, I'll lose the very thing that made me feel valuable. So I kept listening. I kept supporting. I kept saying I was fine. And because I kept saying it, people believed me. Nobody knew about the nights where I sat alone in my dorm room at 3 a.m, trying to process everything by myself. Nobody knew because I never gave them the chance to. I had become so focused at supporting others that I stopped allowing myself to be supported. And that's when I understood what it really means to be a moss. Because moss quietly supports everything around it. It protects, it stabilizes, it creates opportunities for growth. But while everyone notices the tall trees growing above it, very few people noticed when the moss begins to dry out. And what really fascinates me about moss is that you rarely notice it when it's there. You notice it when it's gone. We assume they're fine because they rarely ask for anything. And I began to wonder how many people were living the same way. The more I reflected on this, the more I realized that this wasn't just my story. Think about your everyday life. How often do you notice those people who are cleaning the train stations? Or what about those people who are guarding places like corner shops, schools, or any kind of public spaces? Or how does it really make you feel when you see those people working a night shift here in Japan at 24-hour corner shops so that everyone can have what they want at any time? Have you ever really thought about them? Well, I feel like most people would probably say, well, that's their job. Yes, that is true. But what would happen if they weren't there? For example, the train stations would simply be dirtier. Public spaces would feel less safe. And most importantly here, the corner shops here, it wouldn't simply function, right? You notice how important they are when they're no longer there. And that's when I want you guys to understand that moss isn't just in the forests. It's everywhere. It's those people who carry responsibilities that makes everyone else's life easier. And I call these people quiet stabilizers. Not because they're weak, but because they have become so focused at supporting others that their own needs fades in the background. And at some point, their support becomes expected and ordinary. When everyone knows you are the reliable one, admitting that you're struggling can feel like an unspoken promise. And for a long time, I felt and lived that way too. I thought my value came from what I provide. And that led me to another question. why do so many of us remain moss forever? And I think the answer is actually simpler than we realize. Being moss feels safe. People rely on them. And over time, those expectations can become difficult to let go of. And eventually, you just stop questioning it. At least I did. Until I found myself asking a question that I had spent years avoiding. What if my role in life wasn't simply to prepare the ground for others? What if I was allowed to grow too? Preparing this talk really engaged me into reflecting that part of myself more deeply than I ever had before. And I realized something. The lesson of moss is not that everyone should become visible. The lesson of moss is that importance and visibility are not the same thing. As a society, we have become very good at noticing what is loud, impressive, and measurable. We celebrate the tallest trees. But we should become equally good at noticing what is steady, reliable, and quietly essential. Because when we fail to value those people who hold the ground together, we weaken the very foundation that everything else depends on. Perhaps the mark of a mature society is not how highly it elevates its tallest trees, but how carefully it protects the moss beneath them. Because a healthy society is not built on one organism trying to carry everything together beneath the surface. It thrives because growth is shared, because support moves in every direction, and because every part of the ecosystem is allowed to develop. The world does not need more people quietly drying out in the shadows. It needs forests. Thank you.